Judge Marcus Holloway had built his career on clarity, facts, precedent, and the unshakable belief that the law, when applied fairly, could right almost any wrong. He had presided over hundreds of cases, each one a puzzle with a solution waiting to be found. But on a wet November evening, standing in the doorway of his downtown chambers, with rain drumming against the windows, he had no idea that the small, soaked figure huddled on the courthouse steps would unravel the most confounding case of his life. The girl looked up at him with eyes that held more questions than answers, and in that moment, Marcus realized that sometimes justice wore the face of a child you never expected to save or need. Marcus locked the heavy oak door behind him and adjusted the strap of his leather briefcase. The courthouse had emptied hours ago, leaving only the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant groan of old pipes. He preferred these quiet evenings when he could review case files without interruption, when the weight of other people's lives felt manageable, contained within manila folders and legal briefs. Tonight, he had stayed late to prepare for a custody hearing scheduled for the following week, a particularly contentious case involving a mother with a history of neglect and a father who had only recently resurfaced after years of absence. He stepped into the corridor, his footsteps echoing against marble floors, and made his way toward the main entrance. The rain had started around 4, a steady downpour that showed no sign of letting up. Marcus pulled his coat tighter as he pushed through the glass doors and into the chill. That was when he saw her. She sat on the third step from the bottom, knees drawn to her chest, a thin denim jacket soaked through. Her hair, dark and tangled, clung to her cheeks. She couldn't have been more than 12 or 13, though it was hard to tell with the way she hunched into herself, trying to disappear. Marcus paused, one hand still on the door handle, and glanced up and down the street. The financial district emptied out after 5, and now, past 8, the sidewalks were deserted except for the occasional blur of headlights cutting through the rain. He approached slowly, conscious not to startle her. "Excuse me, are you all right?" The girl flinched but didn't look up. Her hands, small and pale, gripped the edge of her jacket. Marcus crouched a few feet away, mindful of the distance. He had seen enough frightened witnesses and children in his courtroom to know that trust was earned in inches, not declarations. "It's cold out here," he said gently, "and it's late. Do you need help?" She lifted her head then, just slightly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of her face, sharp cheekbones, a bruise fading to yellow along her jaw, and those eyes, watchful and wary. She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing whether he was safe or just another adult who would make promises he wouldn't keep. "I'm Judge Holloway," Marcus continued, keeping his voice steady. "This is the courthouse. You're not in trouble, but I'd like to make sure you're safe. Do you have someone I can call? A parent, a guardian?" The girl shook her head. It was a small, quick motion, but definitive. Marcus felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had spent decades navigating the complexities of the legal system, but nothing in his training had prepared him for the simplicity of a child sitting alone in the rain with nowhere to go. "All right," he said, straightening. "Then let's get you inside, where it's warm. We can figure out the rest from there." She hesitated, then slowly pushed herself to her feet. She was taller than he had expected, almost to his shoulder, but she moved with the cautious, measured steps of someone who had learned to be invisible. Marcus held the door open, and she slipped past him into the lobby. The overhead lights cast harsh shadows, making the bruise on her jaw more pronounced. Marcus made a mental note to call Child Protective Services as soon as they were settled. He led her to his chambers, a modest office lined with bookshelves and framed diplomas. He gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. "Sit, please." The girl sank into the chair, still gripping the edges of her jacket. Marcus shrugged off his coat and draped it over the back of his own chair, before pulling a small space heater from beneath the desk. He plugged it in and angled it toward her. The warmth filled the room slowly, and he watched as her shoulders began to relax, just a fraction. "What's your name?" he asked, settling into his chair. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted to the window, where rain streaked down the glass in erratic patterns. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lily." "Lily," Marcus repeated,
committing it to memory. That's a nice name. How long have you been out there, Lily? She shrugged. I don't know. A while. Marcus leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you in danger? Is someone looking for you? Lily's eyes snapped at his, and for the first time he saw something other than fear. Desperation, maybe, or the faint flicker of hope. I can't go back, she said, her voice firmer now. Please, I can't. Marcus felt the weight of those words settle over him. He had heard similar pleas in his courtroom, from defendants and witnesses alike, but there was something raw and immediate about hearing them here, in the quiet of his office, from a child who had no one else to turn to. I'm not going to make you go anywhere tonight, he said carefully, but I do need to make some calls. I need to make sure you're safe, and that means involving people who can help. Do you understand? Lily nodded, though her hands tightened around the fabric of her jacket. Marcus reached for the phone on his desk and dialed the after-hours line for Child Protective Services. The call was brief, professional, and maddeningly impersonal. They would send someone within the hour, he was told, to assess the situation and determine next steps. Marcus hung up and turned back to Lily, who was watching him with the same wary expression. Someone's coming to talk to you. In the meantime, are you hungry? Lily's eyes widened slightly, and she nodded. Marcus stood and rummaged through the small cabinet near the window, pulling out a tin of crackers and a bottle of water. He set them on the desk in front of her, and she took them with trembling hands. She ate slowly, methodically, as if rationing each bite. Marcus watched her, a dozen questions forming in his mind, but he held them back. There would be time for questions later. The social worker arrived 40 minutes later, a brisk woman in her 40s, with a tablet and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her name was Karen, and she spoke in the clipped, efficient tones of someone who had seen too much and had long ago stopped being surprised by it. She asked Lily a series of questions, her full name, her age, where she had come from, but Lily's answers were vague, evasive. She didn't know her last name, she said. She had been staying with someone, but she didn't want to say who. She was 13, maybe 14. She wasn't sure. Karen glanced at Marcus, her expression unreadable. She watched by Egan, she said. We'll need to take her to a shelter for the night. We can sort out the details in the morning. Marcus nodded, but something about the situation gnawed at him. Lily hadn't moved from the chair, hadn't made a sound since Karen had arrived. She looked smaller now, somehow, as if the walls of the office were closing in on her. Marcus walked Karen to the door, keeping his voice low. Keep me updated, he said. I'd like to know where she ends up. Karen gave him a look that was equal parts skeptical and resigned. This isn't your case, Judge Holloway. I know, but I found her. That means something. Karen sighed, but didn't argue. She returned to Lily and helped her to her feet. Lily glanced back at Marcus as they left, and he gave her a small nod, a silent promise that he wouldn't forget her. The door closed behind them, and the office felt suddenly too large, too empty. Marcus sat down at his desk and stared at the phone, at the case file stacked neatly to one side, and wondered what he had just walked into. But something else lingered, something he couldn't quite name yet, a sense that Lily wasn't just a lost girl in need of help, but a piece of a puzzle he hadn't even realized was missing. The following Monday, Marcus arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual. He had spent the weekend thinking about Lily, replaying their brief conversation in his mind, trying to piece together the gaps in her story. He had called Karen twice, but both times he had been redirected to voicemail. The system, he knew, moved slowly, grinding through paperwork and protocols, while children like Lily waited in limbo. He unlocked his chambers and set his briefcase on the desk. The custody hearing was scheduled for 9, and he had an hour to review the case one more time. The file was thick, documenting years of dysfunction, missed visitations, failed drug tests, allegations of neglect. The mother, Sandra Briggs, had lost custody of her daughter 3 years ago after a string of arrests. The father, Derek Briggs, had been absent for most of the child's life, resurfacing only after Sandra's incarceration. Now both were vying for custody, each claiming they had changed, each insisting they were the better parent. Marcus flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening as he read.
The daughter, Emily Briggs, was 14, just a year older than Lily, if Lily's age was accurate. Emily had been placed in foster care after Sandra's arrest, and by all accounts she had struggled. She had run away twice, both times returning on her own after a few days. The social worker's notes described her as withdrawn and difficult to engage, words that Marcus had seen too many times in too many files. He closed the folder and rubbed his temples. Custody cases were always the hardest. They required him to balance the letter of the law with the messy, unpredictable reality of human behavior. He had to weigh evidence and testimony, yes, but also instinct, the sense that something was off even when the facts didn't quite add up. The hearing began promptly at 9. Sandra Briggs entered first, her attorney at her side. She was thin, her skin pallid, her hands trembling slightly as she took her seat. She had completed a rehab program, her attorney explained, and had been sober for 18 months. She had a job now, a small apartment, and a support network. She wanted her daughter back. Derek Briggs followed, his attorney presenting a similar narrative. He had moved back to the city 6 months ago, secured steady employment, and was living in a 2-bedroom apartment. He had been attending therapy, he said, to work through his own issues. He wanted a chance to be the father he should have been all along. Marcus listened, his expression neutral, as both sides made their arguments. The case hinged on one question: which parent, if either, could provide a stable, safe environment for Emily? It was a question Marcus had answered dozens of times before, but today it felt heavier, more urgent. He kept thinking about Lily, about the way she had looked at him with that mix of fear and hope, and he wondered if Emily Briggs looked at the world the same way. Then the court clerk handed him a note, a small folded piece of paper marked urgent. Marcus opened it discreetly and read the handwritten message. Emily Briggs did not show up for her foster placement last night. Current whereabouts unknown. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. He glanced up at the clerk, who gave a slight nod, confirming the information. Marcus called for a recess, much to the confusion of both attorneys. He stepped into his chambers and immediately called Karen. This time she answered. "Judge Holloway," she said, her tone weary, "I assume this is about the Briggs girl." "She's missing," Marcus said, his voice sharp. "How long?" "Since yesterday evening. She left the foster home around 6 and didn't come back, but—" "But what?" Marcus interrupted. "She's a 14-year-old girl in the system, and she's out there somewhere. What are you doing to find her?" Karen sighed. "We're doing everything we can, Judge, but Emily has a history of running. She always comes back." Marcus closed his eyes, forcing himself to stay calm. "What about the girl I brought in last week, Lily? Where is she?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "She's in a group home on the east side. Why?" "I need the address, and I need to know if anyone has been able to identify her." "We're still working on that," Karen admitted. "She won't give us her last name, and there's no missing persons report that matches her description. It's like she doesn't exist." Marcus thanked her and hung up. He stood in the middle of his chambers, staring at the case files on his desk, and felt the pieces of something larger begin to shift into place. 2 girls, both around the same age, both with incomplete stories, one missing from the system, the other refusing to enter it. It could be a coincidence, but Marcus had spent enough time in the courtroom to know that coincidences were rare. He returned to the hearing and addressed both attorneys. "I'm postponing this case for 2 weeks. Emily Briggs is currently missing, and until she's located, I cannot make a determination regarding her custody. In the meantime, I'm ordering a full investigation into her disappearance and the circumstances surrounding her foster placement." Sandra Briggs gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Derek Briggs leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. The attorneys exchanged glances, but didn't object. Marcus dismissed the court and retreated once again to his chambers. He spent the rest of the morning making calls, to the police, to social services, to anyone who might have information about Emily Briggs or the mysterious girl named Lily. By noon, he had learned very little. Emily had been seen leaving the foster home alone, carrying a backpack. No one had followed her. No one had stopped her.
She had simply walked out the door and disappeared. Marcus grabbed his coat and headed for the east side of the city. The group home where Lily was staying was a converted Victorian house on a quiet street lined with bare trees. He rang the bell and was greeted by a young woman with tired eyes and a practiced smile. He introduced himself and asked to see Lily. "She's in the common room," she said, leading him inside, "but I should warn you, she doesn't talk much." Marcus found Lily sitting by a window, a book open in her lap. She looked up when he entered, and for a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or relief. Marcus pulled a chair over and sat down beside her. "Hi, Lily," he said gently. "I wanted to check in on you. How are you doing?" She shrugged, her gaze dropping back to the book. "Okay, I guess." Marcus hesitated, then decided to take a chance. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you know a girl named Emily Briggs?" Lily's head snapped up, and Marcus saw it, the flash of panic, the quick intake of breath. She knew. She knew something, and she was afraid to say it. "Lily," Marcus said softly, "if you know where Emily is, if you know anything that could help me find her, you need to tell me. She's in danger, and so are you if you're protecting her." Lily's hands tightened around the book, her knuckles white. She looked at Marcus, and in her eyes she saw the same desperation she had seen that first night. "She didn't mean to run," Lily whispered. "She was scared. They were going to send her back, and she just couldn't." Marcus leaned forward, keeping his voice steady. "Back where, Lily? Where was Emily afraid to go?" But Lily shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks now. "I can't. If I tell you, they'll know. They'll find us." And in that moment, Marcus understood. This wasn't just about a runaway girl or a custody battle. This was something darker, something that had driven two children to the edges of the system where they thought they could disappear. Marcus reached out and gently placed a hand on Lily's shoulder. "I'm going to help you, both of you, but you have to trust me."
Marcus spent the next 2 days piecing together a picture he wished he didn't have to see. He pulled every string he had, calling in favors from colleagues, detectives, and social workers who owed him one. What emerged was a web of neglect, corruption, and fear that stretched far beyond a simple custody dispute. Emily Briggs hadn't just run away from her foster home. She had run from a man named Carl Renwick, a foster parent with a spotless record on paper, but a darker reputation among the children who had passed through his care. Renwick ran a licensed group home on the south side, one that had been flagged multiple times for minor infractions, missed inspections, incomplete paperwork, but nothing serious enough to warrant closure. Emily had been placed there 6 months ago, and according to the thin file Marcus managed to access, she had been a model resident. She attended school, followed the rules, and caused no trouble. But Marcus knew better than to trust a file. He drove to the group home unannounced, a 3-story brick building with peeling paint and narrow windows. Renwick met him at the door, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a genial smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Judge Holloway," Renwick said, extending a hand. "What brings you here?" Marcus didn't take the hand. "I'm looking into the disappearance of Emily Briggs. She was placed in your care, and now she's missing." Renwick's smile faltered just for a moment. "Emily was a troubled girl," he said smoothly. "She had a history of running. We did everything we could to support her, but sometimes these kids, well, they make their own choices." Marcus stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The interior was clean but institutional, the kind of place that looked fine on an inspection but felt hollow, devoid of warmth. A few teenagers sat in the common room, watching television with blank expressions. None of them looked at Marcus as he passed. "I'd like to speak to the other residents. Alone." Renwick's jaw tightened. "I'm not sure that's appropriate without proper authorization." Marcus turned to face him, his voice dropping to a tone he reserved for the courtroom. I'm a sitting judge investigating a missing child. If you obstruct me, I will make it my personal mission to ensure every aspect of this facility is scrutinized down to the last invoice. Now, are you going to cooperate, or do I need to make some calls?" Renwick's smile disappeared entirely. He gestured toward a small office off the main hall. "Fine, but I'm staying." Marcus interviewed 3 teenagers that afternoon. 2 of them gave vague, rehearsed answers, their eyes darting toward Renwick every time Marcus asked a pointed question. But the third, a boy named Marco, was different. He was 16, with a scar above his left eyebrow and a defiant tilt to his chin. When Marcus asked about Emily, Marco glanced at Renwick, then leaned forward and spoke in a low voice. "She didn't run," Marco said. "She escaped." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Escaped from what? Marco hesitated, then shook his head. "I can't say. But if you want to find her, ask Lily. She knows." Marcus left the group home with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. Lily and Emily were connected, and whatever they were running from, it was centered on Carl Renwick. He drove back to the group home where Lily was staying and found her in the same spot by the window. This time he didn't ease into the conversation. "Lily," he said, pulling the chair close, "I know you're scared. I know you think that if you tell me the truth, something bad will happen, but I need you to trust me. Emily is out there somewhere, and if we don't find her soon, she could be in serious danger. So I'm asking you again, do you know where she is?" Lily stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then, slowly, she nodded. "She's hiding," Lily said. "At the old community center on Maple Street, the one that's been closed for years." Marcus stood immediately. "How do you know?" "Because that's where I was hiding, too, before you found me." The pieces clicked into place with brutal clarity. Lily hadn't been a random runaway. She had been part of the same system that had failed Emily, and she had chosen the courthouse steps because she knew it was the one place where someone might actually listen. Marcus reached out and squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you," he said. "I'm going to find her, and then I'm going to make sure neither of you has to run again." The community center was a relic from another era. A low brick building surrounded by overgrown grass and boarded-up windows. Marcus approached cautiously, his footsteps crunching on gravel. He called out Emily's name, his voice echoing in the stillness. For a moment, there was nothing. Then he heard it, a faint shuffle from inside, the creak of a door. "Emily," he called again. "My name is Judge Holloway. I'm a friend of Lily's. She told me where to find you. I'm not here to take you back. I'm here to help." The door opened a crack, and a face peered out. Thin, wary, with dark circles under her eyes. Emily Briggs looked so much like Lily that Marcus wondered how he hadn't seen it before. They could have been sisters, bound not by blood, but by the shared weight of survival. "How do you know you're telling the truth?" Emily asked, her voice hoarse. Marcus took a step closer, keeping his hands visible. "Because Lily trusted me, and because I've spent the last 2 days trying to figure out what Carl Renwick did to both of you. I know you're scared, Emily, but I can protect you. I can make sure he can't hurt you anymore, but I need you to come with me." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She looked so young, so fragile, and Marcus felt a surge of anger at the system that had let her down, at the adults who had turned a blind eye. She stepped out of the shadows, clutching a worn backpack, and Marcus led her to his car. They drove in silence, the city lights blurring past, until finally, Emily spoke. "He was going to sell us," she said, her voice barely audible. "Me and Lily, and the others. Not like
Not like in a way people talk about, but he had people who would pay to take kids off the books, kids no one was looking for. Lily and I figured it out and we ran, but she got caught and I thought they'd come for me too. Marcus gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. You're safe now. Both of you. I promise. When they arrived back at the group home where Lily was staying, the reunion was quiet but profound. The two girls hugged, clinging to each other, as if they were the only solid things in a world that had proven unreliable. Marcus watched them, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of his role not as a burden, but as a privilege. He had the power to change this, to ensure that justice wasn't just a word on a page, but something real and tangible. That night, Marcus filed a formal complaint against Carl Renwick, detailing everything he had uncovered. He called in every favor, reached out to every contact, and set in motion an investigation that would take months to complete. But he knew it was only the beginning. The system was broken, and two brave girls had shown him just how badly. Now, it was his job to fix it, one case at a time.
3 weeks later, Marcus sat in his chambers, preparing for a hearing that would determine the future of both Lily and Emily. In the time since their reunion, he had worked tirelessly to build a case that would not only protect them, but also hold Carl Renwick accountable. The investigation had uncovered a network of illegal placements, falsified records, and financial transactions that painted a damning picture. Renwick had been arrested, and his group home had been shut down pending a full review. But the question of what to do with Lily and Emily remained. Neither had family willing or able to take them in. Their options were limited: another group home, separate foster placements, or something Marcus had been considering since the night he first found Lily on the courthouse steps. There was a knock on the door, and Karen entered, followed by Lily and Emily. Both girls looked healthier than they had weeks ago, their faces less drawn, their eyes a little brighter. Marcus gestured for them to sit, and Karen took a seat beside them. "I wanted to talk to you both before the hearing," Marcus began. "We're going to formally address your custody arrangements today, and I want to make sure you understand what your options are." Lily and Emily exchanged a glance, their hands clasped together. Marcus had come to understand that they communicated in a language all their own, forged in the crucible of shared trauma. Emily spoke first. "We want to stay together," she said firmly. "Whatever happens, we don't want to be separated." Marcus nodded. "I understand, and I'm going to do everything I can to make that happen. But I also want you to know that there's another option, something I've been thinking about for a while now." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm a single man. I have a stable home, a steady income, and more than enough space. I'm not a perfect person, and I've never been a parent. But I've spent the last few weeks getting to know both of you, and I've seen your strength, your resilience. You deserve a chance to grow up in a place where you're safe, where you're valued. If you're willing, I'd like to become your guardian." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with disbelief and hope. Lily's eyes filled with tears, and Emily's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. Karen looked as though she'd been struck by lightning. "Judge Holloway," she said slowly, "that's a significant commitment. Are you certain?" Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He turned back to the girls. "This is your choice. No pressure, no expectations. If you'd rather explore other options, I'll support that. But if you want a home, a real home, I'm offering you mine." Lily was the first to move. She stood, crossed the small space between them, and wrapped her arms around Marcus. He felt her small frame shake with silent sobs, and he held her gently, one hand resting on the back of her head. Emily followed, and soon Marcus found himself surrounded by two girls who had every reason not to trust an adult, but were choosing to anyway. The hearing that afternoon was unlike any Marcus had presided over before.
This time, he was on the other side of the bench. A colleague, Judge Patricia Alvarez, had agreed to oversee the proceedings. She listened as Marcus outlined his proposal, as Karen presented her assessment, and as Lily and Emily, in quiet but steady voices, explained why they wanted to stay with the man who had saved them. Patricia took her time, reviewing the documents, asking probing questions. Finally, she leaned back in her chair and regarded Marcus with a mixture of respect and curiosity. "Judge Holloway," she said, "you've spent your career upholding the law, and now you're asking me to trust you with something far more important. I've reviewed your home study, your references, and the testimony of these two young women. I'm inclined to approve this arrangement on a provisional basis with regular check-ins and a formal review in 6 months. But I want to be clear. At any point, I believe this placement is not in the best interest of Lily or Emily. I will not hesitate to intervene." Marcus nodded. "I understand, Your Honor, and I welcome the oversight." Patricia signed the order, and just like that, Marcus's life changed. He left the courthouse that evening not as a solitary figure, but as a guardian, a protector, a father. The weight of it was staggering, but so was the sense of purpose. For years he had believed that his role was to interpret the law, to apply it fairly and without bias. But Lily and Emily had taught him something else. Sometimes justice required more than legal precedent. Sometimes it required courage, compassion, and the willingness to step outside the boundaries of what was expected. Over the following months, Marcus's home transformed. The spare bedroom became Lily's, decorated with posters of bands she liked and a small desk where she did her homework. The guest room became Emily's, filled with books and a collection of plants she had started tending to. The kitchen, once a place Marcus rarely used, became the heart of the house. They cooked together, experimenting with recipes and laughing when things didn't turn out right. Pancakes became a Sunday tradition, a small ritual that anchored them. Marcus learned to navigate the challenges of parenthood, the late-night conversations about fears and dreams, the school meetings, the inevitable arguments over curfews and responsibilities. He made mistakes, stumbled over words, and occasionally felt overwhelmed. But through it all, Lily and Emily were patient, teaching him as much as he taught them. The case against Carl Renwick moved forward, gaining momentum as more victims came forward. Marcus testified, his anger carefully controlled but unmistakable. He watched as Renwick was sentenced to 15 years, a small measure of justice for the children he had exploited. And he made it his mission to advocate for systemic reform, working with legislators and advocacy groups to close the loopholes that had allowed Renwick to operate unchecked. One evening, nearly a year after Marcus had first found Lily on the courthouse steps, the three of them sat on the back porch, watching the sun set. Lily leaned against Marcus's shoulder, and Emily stretched out on the step below them, her face tilted toward the sky. "Do you ever think about that night, when you found me?" Lily asked quietly. Marcus considered the question. "All the time," he admitted. "I think about how close I came to walking past you, to assuming someone else would help." "I'm glad you didn't," Lily said. "So am I," Marcus replied. He looked at both girls, at the family they had become, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. They had saved each other, in ways big and small, and he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Emily sat up and turned to face them. "We should plant a tree," she said suddenly. "Something to mark this, something that will grow with us." Marcus smiled. "I think that's a perfect idea." The next weekend, they planted an oak tree in the backyard, its roots sinking deep into the soil. It was a small sapling now, fragile and unassuming, but Marcus knew that in time it would grow strong, its branches reaching toward the sky. And as he stood there with Lily and Emily, their hands dirty and their laughter bright, he understood that this messy, imperfect, beautiful thing was what justice looked like when it was tempered with love.
2 years after Marcus became a guardian, the oak tree in the backyard had grown taller than Lily. Its leaves rustled in the breeze, casting dappled shadows across the lawn, where Emily sat with a notebook, sketching the way the light filtered through the branches. Marcus watched from the kitchen window, a cup of coffee in hand, and marveled at how ordinary this moment felt, and how extraordinary. Lily had just turned 16. She was thriving in school, her grades strong, her confidence growing. She had joined the debate team, a natural fit for someone who had learned to argue for her survival long before she learned to argue for fun. Emily, now 17, had discovered a passion for environmental science and spent her weekends volunteering at a local conservation center. She talked about college with the certainty that still surprised Marcus, as if the future was something she could shape rather than something that happened to her. But not every day was easy. There were still moments when the past crept in, when a sudden noise or an unexpected question triggered memories neither girl wanted to revisit. Marcus had learned to recognize the signs. The way Lily's shoulders would tense, the way Emily would go quiet and retreat to her room. He had learned to sit with them in those moments, to offer presence rather than solutions, to remind them that healing wasn't linear. The legal battles had continued as well. Marcus had become a vocal advocate for child welfare reform, testifying before state committees and writing op-eds that called out the failures of the foster care system. He had made enemies along the way, bureaucrats who resented his scrutiny, officials who saw his involvement as overreach. But he had also found allies, social workers and judges who shared his commitment to change. Together, they had drafted legislation that increased oversight of group homes, mandated more frequent check-ins for at-risk children, and provided funding for mental health services. Carl Renwick's case had become a cautionary tale, a stark example of what happened when the system prioritized paperwork over people. Marcus had been present at every hearing, watching as more victims testified, as the full scope of Renwick's crimes came to light. The man had shown no remorse, clinging to the fiction that he had been helping troubled kids. Marcus had felt a cold satisfaction when the final sentence was handed down. 15 years, no possibility of parole. But the victory felt incomplete. Renwick was one man, one symptom of a much larger problem. Marcus knew that for every case that ended with accountability, there were dozens more that slipped through the cracks. He thought about that often, late at night when the house was quiet and he couldn't sleep. He thought about the children he couldn't save, the ones who were still out there, waiting for someone to notice. One evening, as the three of them sat down to dinner, a simple meal of pasta and salad that they had prepared together, Lily brought up something that had been on her mind. "I want to talk to other kids," she said, twirling her fork through the noodles. "The ones in the system. I want to tell them that it gets better, that there are people who care." Marcus set down his fork. "That's a big step, Lily. Are you sure you're ready?" Lily nodded. "I've been thinking about it for a while. I know it won't be easy, but I feel like I have to do something. I can't just forget what happened to us." Emily reached across the table and squeezed Lily's hand. "I'll help," she said. "We can do it together." Marcus felt a swell of pride. These two young women who had every reason to retreat from the world were choosing to engage with it, to use their pain as a catalyst for change. He had given them a home, yes, but they had given him something far more valuable, a sense of purpose that extended beyond the courtroom, a reminder that justice was as much about prevention as it was about punishment. Over the next few months, Lily and Emily worked with a local nonprofit to develop a peer mentorship program for foster youth. They spoke at schools and community centers, sharing their stories with a raw honesty that left audiences in tears. They didn't sugarcoat the experience. They talked about the fear, the uncertainty, the feeling of being invisible. But they also talked about resilience, about finding people who believed in you, about building a life on your own terms. Marcus attended every event, sitting in the back row and watching as his daughters, because that's what they were now in every way that mattered, stood on stage and spoke truth to power. He saw the impact they had, the way other kids leaned forward, hungry for proof that they weren't alone. And he realized that this was the legacy he wanted to leave, not a body of legal opinions, but a network of support, a community that refused to let children fall through the cracks. One Saturday afternoon, Marcus took Lily and Emily to the courthouse. It had been Emily's idea. She wanted to see the steps where Lily had been found, to understand the place that had changed all of their lives. They stood there together, the three of them, and Marcus told them the story again, filling in details they hadn't heard before. He described the rain, the way Lily had looked so small and lost, the moment when he decided to stop and help. "I was terrified," Lily admitted. "I thought you were going to call the police, that I'd end up back with Renwick or worse." "I almost did call the police," Marcus said, "but something stopped me. I think it was the look in your eyes. You weren't just scared, you were determined, and that made me want to know more." Emily turned to Marcus. "Do you ever regret it, taking us in?" Marcus didn't hesitate, not for a single second. They walked around the building, Marcus pointing out the offices where he had spent so many years, the courtrooms where he had made decisions that shaped lives. He introduced them to colleagues, some of whom had been skeptical of his decision to become a guardian, but who now spoke with genuine admiration. Lily and Emily asked questions, curious about the work he did, the cases he heard, and Marcus realized that they were beginning to understand the world he inhabited, the balance between law and compassion that defined his career. As they left the courthouse, Lily paused and looked back at the steps. "I think this is where our story really started," she said. "Not where it ended, but where it began." Marcus nodded. "I think you're right." The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Lily graduated high school with honors and decided to pursue a degree in social work. Emily was accepted into a prestigious environmental science program on a full scholarship. Marcus helped them move into their dorm rooms, his heart both breaking and swelling with pride. They would come home for holidays, bringing friends and laughter, and the easy confidence of young adults who knew they were loved. But even as they grew more independent, they remained tethered to the oak tree in the backyard, to the rituals they had built together. Pancakes on Sunday mornings, movie nights with popcorn and debates over which film to watch. The annual tradition of adding a new ornament to the tree, each one representing a milestone or a memory. And Marcus, who had once believed that his life was defined by the cases he presided over, came to understand that his truest legacy was not in the courtroom, but in the lives of two girls who had trusted him when they had every reason not to. They had taught him that justice was not an abstract principle, but a lived experience, that it required not just impartiality, but empathy, not just adherence to rules, but the courage to break them when necessary. One evening, years after that first rainy night, Marcus sat on the back porch alone. The oak tree had grown tall and strong, its branches spreading wide. He thought about the girl on the courthouse steps, about the choice he had made to stop, to help, to care. He thought about the case that brought Emily into his life, the web of corruption and neglect that he had fought to dismantle. And he thought about the future, about the work that still needed to be done. Lily and Emily were adults now, building lives of their own, but they would always be his daughters. And the oak tree, planted on a day when they were still learning to trust each other, stood as a testament to what they had built together. A family forged not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the simple, profound act of showing up when it mattered most. And Marcus thought that was the truest form of justice there was.